And can I just confirm what you guys can see? Is it the front slide?
Yeah, we see the stigma, disclosure, criminalization, and access to care slide.
Perfect. Okay. Great. So I will start. Thank you all for attending this today. We are so happy to be here. We also want to acknowledge that the land on which we work is the unceded traditional and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. I don't want to take up too much space for this, but I do want to take a brief moment to position myself as a settler scholar on unceded lands and recognize and acknowledge the privilege that comes along with that. From the perspective of those of us presenting today for settlers, I want to emphasize that we strongly feel it is not always and only the responsibility of Black, Indigenous people, or other people of color to call out structural racism. So it's important for us to do some of this work as allies. So importantly, over half of the participants in the SHAWNA Project studies that we'll present on today are Indigenous, including First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, while representing only 4 to 6% of the overall Canadian population. It's important for us to think about our implicitness as settlers within settler colonialism and our roles in perpetuating or benefiting from settler colonialism. For the over half of participants in our studies were Indigenous, Canada's history of residential schools and settler colonialism, embedded within centuries of systemic racism, have played a fundamental role as the primary social structural determinant of health inequities. So I'd like to give a summary of our presentation today, as there will be a few of us here presenting. So I'm Kathleen Deering. I'm an assistant professor at UBC and research scientist at the Center for Gender and Sexual Health Equity, which I will call the CGSHE or CGSHE. Here with Desire Tibashoboka, who is a community engagement associate with SHAWNA and front desk assistant as part of the operations team at the CGSHE. Our presentation will close with Andrea Krusi, also an assistant professor at UBC and research scientist with the CGSHE. We want to thank you again for showing up despite technical difficulties and giving us the opportunity to share our research today. So I'll also say that we're going to bring in a sense, a number of additional co-presenters in the form of recordings. Some of these are done in the last week and some are a bit older. We have been extremely privileged to have worked with an amazing peer research team. There have been different people making up this team, but in the last few years, it has consistently been 3 Indigenous, cis, or trans participants of SHAWNA who have all been part of SHAWNA since the very beginning in 2014. And so these include Flo Randall, who has been a longtime peer researcher, peer mentor, and qualitative interviewer and community engagement associate with the SHAWNA qualitative team. And some of you may know her as well. These also include Lulu Gurney and Barb Gordon, who are such strong leaders and members of our peer research team. We'll hear from Flo today by recording, and we'll also hear from several members of the SHAWNA Positive Women's Advisory Board, which is a guiding force and has made as a group really fundamental contributions to SHAWNA research. As everyone here has experienced, and even today, I mean, COVID has resulted in many challenges regarding how we connect with people and in people's availability and ability to connect. But we think we've made it work today, tech willing, for rest of it. And I just want to take this moment to thank all the presenters here today, and including those who are not actually with us in real time, but are still in our thoughts. So as part of speaking to where we work, we want to bring you into our space as well. SHAWNA is housed at the CGSHE offices, along with many other community-based studies. We strive for these spaces to be welcoming and safe for all participants. So you can see here, this is our primary community research office, located in the downtown east side of Vancouver. Inside the space is where we have historically interviewed participants in person, although since COVID began, we've been prioritizing remote interviews where possible. This isn't always possible for all participants, as access to technology can be limited for some. So we also have the very important opportunity to come into the office within the context of a very detailed and comprehensive safety plan. So going inside the building, this is a photo of our front desk and waiting area, and you can see down the stairs to the street. We also have a lift adjacent to the stairs. So once at the top of the stairs and around the corner or next to the lift doors, we also have an Indigenous resource library, which has been organized by the Tsidishe Indigenous Cultural Safety Committee. This space is intended to be a welcoming area for participants and staff to take a moment for rest, reflection, and learning. You may also have seen the amazing mural on one of the walls in an earlier photo. Tsidishe's Indigenous Cultural Safety Committee was honored to welcome artist Heisa Collins and elders Roberta Price and Greta Morgan to our community office for a ceremony to commemorate the mural Heisa created for our space, titled Our Communities Rise Like the Butterflies. So SHAWNA is a community-based longitudinal study that includes cisgender and transgender women and two-spirit people living with HIV. SHAWNA includes both quantitative and qualitative and arts-based components. The qualitative SHAWNA cohort is an open cohort with ongoing recruitment that currently includes more than 330 participants and growing. Complete a baseline interview and then are followed up every 6 months and respond to a follow-up interview. The cohort also includes a clinical component with voluntary viral load and CD4 measurements, as well as serology for STIs and Hep C, and active referrals for broader health care services, including a visit with a sexual health research nurse. SHAWNA cohort was renewed officially in April for another 5 years, from 2020 to 2025, with limited funding through CIHR, and this is led by myself. SHAWNA's qualitative and arts-based components are led by Andrea, and this includes a subset of the quantitative cohort of about 80 to 90 participants. SHAWNA qualitative was renewed for bridge funding earlier this year for 6 months and wrapped up active interviews in the summer of 2020. The overarching objective of SHAWNA over the years has been to understand the impact of broad social and structural factors associated with HIV care continuum outcomes, as well as with sexual and reproductive health services access, and to understand the experiences of cis and trans women and two-spirit people living with HIV and navigating care through their lifetimes. The longitudinal nature of the cohort allows us to respond to changing situations in time, like COVID-19, or the closure of AIDS services, organizations, which have unfortunately been fairly common in Metro Vancouver in recent years, and also shifts in laws, and also to examine patterns and trajectories that occur throughout people's lifetimes. We have refined some key objectives listed here in the next few years based on our research findings and community needs and interests, but these are very broad in scope and don't capture the vast sub-objectives and sub-hypotheses to the study. SHAWNA has engaged participants in community in a number of different ways over the last 5 years, and we really aim to build on this in the next 5 years. So we have awe-inspiring community research team of quantitative and qualitative interviewers, all with deep roots in the community, including interviewers with lived experience living with HIV. The SHAWNA Community Engagement Associates, positive advisory working groups, peer research teams, and positive women's advisory boards have all played a critical role in supporting recruitment, reaching out to community collaborators, and actively participating in research studies, including co-authoring and co-presenting research over the years, as well as many other roles in knowledge translation and exchange. These groups all purposely reflect the demographics of SHAWNA participants, with more than half of members being Indigenous and at least 5 to 10% coming from Black and African Canadian communities. We've also benefited greatly from long-time collaborations with community organizations, including YouthCo, HIV and Hep Society, ACPNet, HIV Legal Network, and CAN. And in particular, Sherry Puyat has been an amazing co-author and collaborator over the years. One of our interests in doing this presentation is in hopes of continuing, reinforcing, and building on these relationships. So I'm going to very happily pass this part of the presentation off to Desire, who will be talking more about the PayWeb, and we will also bring in several PayWeb members virtually via several interviews we've done in the last week.
Thank you, Catherine. In the following slides, I'm going to be talking about PayWeb, and just to repeat what Catherine has said, the Positive Women's Advisory Board and the Positive Women's Advisory Working Groups and the peer research team purposely reflect the demographics of SHAWNA participants. SHAWNA takes guidance from the works closely with the Positive Women's Advisory Board. It is made up of a team of about 12 to 20 women. As you can see in the background is a picture of some of us It's wonderful, resilient women. I wish you could zoom in. That is really beautiful picture. And I'm right there next to Andrea in the yellow shirt. That's me. So anyways, you're gonna hear about what is PayWeb, what our participants do at PayWeb, where it's located, a few of the pictures you've seen from the slides from Catherine. You will hear about the nature of PayWeb, the kind of people, the diversity that you can see already, and particularly what I love about PayWeb. So the Positive Women's Advisory Board, I've been privileged to be a member since I think 2014, I believe 2016. And I've been privileged to meet at least most of the members, and one of the pioneers of the group, Flo, who is now moved on to another position and been offered a different job, but done a great job for Pure. Anyways, I like to speak about PayWeb, not as an introduction. I want to speak about PayWeb for me. I joined PayWeb, like I said, in 2016. And the most reason for me I joined, and I think I will speak for most of the participants, is learning more about HIV, listening to other people's experiences. This will answer why we come together and what we do. Most of those questions will be answered there. I enjoy the community, and I wanted to be part of the research, which is why I'm now working for CGC, as we call it. We seek to find a sense of belonging, which is extremely important for all of us. Some of us come from so far away from Canada, and we find ourselves in these places and there's no family except for maybe a child that you have, or sometimes you're by yourself. So in PayWeb, we come together as a group, and we find and seek a sense of acceptance and belonging and connection with people that you think are like you, or who you believe are like you. We share on that platform about a wide range of things. We talk about, for example, anywhere from how do you feel when you take your medication? When you wake up, what do you do? How do you spend your day? Recently, we had a meeting, and one of the participants shared how the COVID-19 has really affected so many of us. In the past, we used to meet at least 3 to 4 months, every 3 to 4 months. And in those groups, like I mentioned above, we used to share, we sit, we eat, we have food, we share. Sometimes the kids are allowed to come, and it's always a beautiful time. And one of the ladies actually mentioned how isolated she felt. We are trying to do to put up as many meetings as we can, and now we're doing it over Zoom. It's not as lively as it was when we have to meet in person and hug and share food and talk and laugh out loud and cry with each other, and so many things happen in that team. And such a beautiful space to be in. I personally refer to PayWeb as this beautiful space that is a beautiful environment that is so rich in terms of color, race, and food, and all kinds of stuff. People, we come to a place where everybody has a common interest. This disease, how do you live with it? What do you eat? Where do you go? Which providers are okay for you? Who talks fair? This is a space where we actually gossip, and we are okay because we know it is within us, right? So it's a wonderful space for, I believe, for so many people. Apart from that, there is always encouragement and support. In our recent meetings, one of our participants actually offered to, she offered and also suggested if she would create a Facebook page that at least people would just be on there and meet and to be able to see each other, as opposed to a 2 minute Zoom, maybe a 1 hour Zoom call where we meet and talk about stuff. So that is how much people are connected to the group, how much they love it. And it's been one of those places also that you look forward to for the holidays. For example, we have those events that occurred on towards Christmas, towards Easter, and people come in. People come in and take some gifts home. People share. People talk about how they're going to spend their holidays. People are encouraged. People promise each other, I'll call you if you're all right, if you're going to be okay, if you're going to be alone. So PayWeb has been such a platform for people who I think wouldn't have a voice to be able to come together and just say whatever they want, when they want to say, in that space where they feel they are safe. That is what I think about PayWeb. And the highlight of our meetings is when they're about to end, when what you take away from is everybody's eager to know when is the next day, at what time. Even if we didn't understand everything that happened, we want to know when we are meeting again, when we are going to be around each other again, you know. So it's important even for the children that they come to know each other and people come to learn how they can communicate to their communities. I come from a very marginalized community where speaking about HIV is, I think, worse than HIV itself. We don't talk about stuff like that. That does not mean people don't live with it. They do, but we don't talk about stuff like that. And simply because for the fact that maybe there is sex affiliated to it. So those are things our cultures don't talk about. Then you come to PayWeb and people speak freely of how they're doing this stuff and what they are. So that's that kind of thing. It's empowering us to be able to go out there and say, oh, look, there is this place you can come to, and and also learn how to express certain things to our children, which is also been a very big challenge again in our communities, because we found people making very big mistakes for parents. As you will see in the slides, we have some parents too that they will even breastfeed their kids because the culture does not allow for you not to, and you cannot talk about stuff like that. So again, PayWeb has allowed for that space where people can, talk about things like that. I can do this, and then they get advice from each other, maybe things that they wouldn't be able to share even with their doctors. But because they're in this space where, she's like me and I'm like her, and we are not these people, but we can talk. So it makes it a lot easy. So I like to speak of PayWeb like from that from my own perspective, as opposed to how I will run you down on what PayWeb does and what is structured to do. I like to speak about what I have seen and what we actually do. So like I said, in the past, we used to meet every 3 months, and now we are not able to because of COVID, but we are trying to meet more online in different groups. They have actually come up with another positive advisory working group that is going to be coming up to meet the small sections of groups, talk about the different stuff. It will be different people because you can't have everybody on. We still have challenges of how people get on, Zoom and all that, but it's coming together. And I believe soon we will be coming together. We have hope that we'll be coming together again. So in this, like I've mentioned, that the few reasons why there's so many, we could go on and on. There's so few reasons why we all come together. There are a few voices that have been recorded by one of our participants. They were very kind to allow us to share that. And Catherine will be playing 2 of them. And I just hope you can listen carefully and hear how our ladies really speak. Maybe I don't even speak about PayWeb. the way they feel about, but maybe you can hear. Catherine, please, if you can.
Okay, thank you so much, Desire. I hope that everyone can hear these.
Yeah. Well, I've been part of it since it began, and I find getting together with the women very uplifting and empowering, because you see all the women. Well, the women. It's a get together. It's a nice get together. It's nice to know about the new research and what you guys are doing and letting us know what's going on. I find this group very supportive group. A very supportive advisory team.
I think so too. Yeah.
We all know each other. We've been together for like 5-6 years now, or however how long now we've been doing it. And these get-togethers are marvelous. Even though it's on the phone, at least we can hear each other's voices.
Okay, thank you to that first PayWeb participant, and I'll now play this up.
What made me join it was when Flo talked to me and she asked me if I would mind like voicing my opinions about HIV meds and stuff like that. Things that had to do with being positive. And I was like, oh yes, yeah, of course I do. Because of my experiences and stuff in the hospitals. And that was the main reason I wanted to, because I wanted to know that there was somebody else out there that was having the same experiences I was. Yeah, and a lot of the time, people rarely speak up about things like when somebody gets discriminated upon or if they get treated, like people just don't speak up about it.
Okay, thank you for that second question, and I will pass that to the fire.
Thank you, Catherine. So as you heard, the voices echo appreciation, and then the last one echoes concern. And just to add to just like the last voice, she was concerned about somebody in their community, something she saw. And like I said, in these groups, we come back and speak about, oh, this, oh, I saw this doctor do that. Oh, but the other nurse was really nice to me. And oh, this person, and this is happening in our community. So, and then, like I said, it's that place, it's home. It's home for people who seek a sense of belonging, for people who want to find friends who are like them, people who want to find family. Some ladies, we call that place family. We're going to a family meeting. We love to call it that. So next slide, please, Catherine. If you can get the next slide, Catherine, please.
I think it should be on the next slide.
Oh, yeah, okay, there we go. Now it's on. Thank you. So as you can see from this picture, we have the quantitative card, and this is part of the SHAWNA follow-up questionnaire. In the SHAWNA co-op side, participants respond to a baseline survey. In the front page is shown here, like as you can see on the, okay, yeah, there on the picture. The questionnaire covers a number of topics, including social demographics, housing, food, security, and experiences with interpersonal violence, relationships, criminalizations, and many aspects of health, including HIV treatment and care outcomes. Since May 2020, we also have a supplementary questionnaire, which is that one up there, on COVID-19 issues, including the effectiveness of public health messages, changes in people's lives since COVID began, including related to mental health, social support, income, food security, and housing, as well as HIV treatment and care in the person's life. Next slide, please. So in this next slide, it shows some infographics of SHAWNA social demographics that were created by SHAWNA peer research team. There are 330 participants in SHAWNA. The inclusion criteria is anyone who identifies as a woman and who reside or in travel to Metro Vancouver to access HIV services. Next slide. So, like I mentioned in my introduction, that what I loved the most about SHAWNA was what I called multiculturalism in it, the beauty and the richness of the group. So, as you can tell here, with the race, we have the Indigenous people coming out at 57%, and we have 34 white people, and we have 5 Afro-Caribbean, and 4 other visible minorities, Asian and Middle East. Next, please. So in this picture, you will see the age, the average age. So actually the median age, which is about 44. So 25% are 50 years or older, 40 to 49, that's 40%, and 30 to 39 are 26%, 14 to 29 and 9%. Next, please. This is the part I talk about and I smile, because it really speaks a lot about PayWeb, especially the 82%. Our participants have parented or given birth, and that's the part I say that sometimes they come into the meetings with their babies, and that's beautiful. For example, I recall just a short story. We had a meeting, it was, I believe, before the COVID, and there is a lady who was sharing this sad story. And there is another lady who had come with a baby. She was about 7 years old. As she sat in the corner, as we went on with our meeting, she was drawing pictures of each one of us. And when we finished the meeting, she came and handed us our pictures. And some of us had 5 legs and 6 ears and all kind of them. It was so beautiful. It was such a turning point for that moment, because we're all, supporting this one person who had a loss, and the girl just jumps up from the corner, I'm done, and she has these pictures, and it was really powerful. So anyways, 82% have parented or given birth, and currently 43% are currently financially supporting one or more dependents, children or partners with other families. Next, please. So in SHAWNA, about 23% report sexual orientation that is LGBTQ2S, and 11% reporting being So speaking of demographics, so this is where most of the chart will show you where most of our participants reside. And as you can tell, like we mentioned before, that the recruitment criteria, you must be living around the Metro Vancouver area. So as you can tell in this picture, we have at least SHAWNA participants living all over Metro Vancouver, and in most places 71% are in Vancouver itself, followed by Surrey by 11%, and the rest living outside of Metro Vancouver, about 7%. So that will conclude my slides, I believe. And I want to thank you all for watching, but the takeaway from PayWeb is we look forward to the meetings all the time. Thank you for listening.
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that amazing discussion about some really key aspects of SHAWNA. So the first study that I'll talk about looked at social structural correlates of HIV stigma among SHAWNA. And this paper has been accepted and it's soon to be published in AIDS and Behavior. We looked at 4 kinds of HIV stigma, including anticipated stigma related to concerns about reactions following disclosure of HIV status, as well as internalized stigma, or stigma that has been absorbed through exposure to negative social attitudes regarding HIV that affect self-image or self-perception, and enacted stigma, or stigma acts or events perpetrated by others and experienced by those living with HIV, and perceived stigma related to perceptions of negative attitudes regarding HIV. So overall, you can see here that reports of HIV stigma by SHAWNA participants was very high. So almost all of SHAWNA participants had experienced some kind of HIV stigma in their lifetimes, and 90% reported experiencing HIV stigma in the last 6 months. The following factors were found to be associated with experiencing internalized HIV stigma: verbal or physical abuse related to HIV status, also a severe form of inactive HIV stigma, physical symptoms related to HIV, and younger age. The following factors were associated with anticipated HIV stigma: having HIV status disclosed without consent, and again, having physical symptoms related to HIV. HIV status disclosure without consent was also associated with inactive HIV stigma, though these results are not shown. I'll next discuss a related study that linked HIV disclosure without consent to enacted HIV stigma, which was presented at CAR 2017 and led by MSc student Daniel Alvarado, who worked very closely with the SHAWNA peer research team. Over half of SHAWNA participants have had their HIV status disclosed without consent in their lifetimes. The study showed that SHAWNA participants whose HIV status was disclosed without their consent were 5 times as likely to experience verbal or physical violence due to HIV status. These studies really reinforce that having HIV status disclosed without consent is a serious concern and violation of human rights, and perpetuates many types of HIV stigma experiences. It can also be seen as a form of enacted HIV stigma itself. These studies highlight the critical importance of supporting safe disclosure practices with cis and trans women and two-spirit people living with HIV, but also increased education in health centers, housing spaces, incarceration spaces, and anywhere that people might have had their HIV status disclosed involuntarily, about the critical importance of agency disclosure, making sure that people living with HIV are supported to disclose status on their own. In another study published in Health Psychology Open earlier this year, HIV status disclosure without consent was associated with depression, with enacted HIV stigma identified as having an important role in explaining this relationship. Verbal or physical abuse related to HIV status was associated with reduced medication self-efficacy or lower confidence in one's ability, or perceived ability to take HIV medication as prescribed. Internalized HIV stigma identified here as having an important role in explaining this relationship. So I just want to highlight a recent change to Pharmanet in BC that has brought up additional concerns of the increased likelihood of HIV status disclosure without consent among participants, with pharmacies now able to see ART as a prescribed medication in Pharmanet. So this change happened in May of this year, pretty quietly, and we will be adding another question in the questionnaire to address whether or not participants are aware of this change, how it has affected them if they are, or how it may affect their feelings of safety and comfort in accessing pharmacies. This next study, led by PhD student Margaret Erickson and published in HIVcriminalization last year, SHAWNA participants also report high levels of criminalization, with over 3/4 reporting having ever been in jail or prison at some point in their lives. The study showed a strong connection between gendered structural factors and incarceration. The following factors were associated with higher risk of being recently incarcerated in the last 6 months: younger age, recent opioid use, recent interpersonal physical or sexual violence, recent homelessness, and police violence. In a separate analysis, also led by Margaret Erickson, we found that incarceration was a primary factor in shaping viral suppression. Women living with HIV who had been incarcerated were 3 times more likely to have an unsuppressed viral load. So in attention to the specific ways that women are engaged in the criminal justice system and their different health needs rest on an illusion of gender neutrality in the criminal justice system. However, the institutions of incarceration and associated interventions have always been implicitly gendered, in accordance with the assumption that men are the default prisoners and are therefore designed with men in mind. While the research presented thus far has not identified a statistically significant association between race and outcomes, it's crucial to recognize again that Indigenous women living with HIV are highly overrepresented in that cohort, and that Indigenous people, as well as Black and other people of color, are highly overrepresented in the criminal justice system due to ongoing systemic racism. This next study, again led by PhD student Margaret Erickson and soon to be published in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence, SHAWNA participants reported a variety of social and structural supports needed to take antiretroviral therapy. 24% reported needing better access to food, 22% reported needing better access to housing, 22% reported needing help with addictions, 20% reported needing peer support, 19% reported needing transportation support, 15% needed financial support, and 13% reported needing trauma or counseling support. So a lot of these are really basic necessities of life, right? And so results from the study showed that Indigenous participants who are other people of color, and participants who had experienced recent physical or sexual violence, who recently used non-injection or injection drugs, and who had recently been diagnosed, monitored, or treated for PTSD, were all more likely to report needing any of these supports to take part. So in interpreting these results, I want to bring in the thoughts of co-author Flo Ranville in this next audio clip via a presentation she did speaking to the study at the Sajishi Speaker Series, at which she, Andrea, and Lulu Gurney presented in 2019. Flo and I also co-presented the results from the study at CAR 2018 to a broad clinical audience, and it was very well received. So based on her experience and expertise, Flo gives some thoughts on how HIV practice should be structured to support art use. And Flo really makes the data speak to her own experience, and her lived experience really intersects with the quantitative results. So I will find that clip and take it away, Flo.
So the trauma-informed care for women living with HIV in our SHAWNA study, it's pretty, I can't really see the number there. Blank, sorry. 95% of SHAWNA participants have experienced physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Like that's almost our entire 340 women, 330 plus women. It's 97% of them. Also, like our, 31% of SHAWNA participants. Oh, sorry, I apologize. I have really bad eyes. These are your 50s. I'm just kidding. In regards to, I guess, adherence, and this is a personal part for me too, because trauma-informed care is so important for so many of my peers in the SHAWNA study. And I do have my own viral load that I'm going to show you in regards to my traumas that I have had experienced. And it's this one. So you can see my viral load from basically 2008 to about 2015, when I finally started to adhere to my meds in the middle of 2014 to 2015. So it's about just 5-6 years ago. And you can see all my vacations I went on because due to my traumas, like maybe when I got HIV diagnosed in 2000, that was a huge trauma for me. And it was a secret for about 10 years. I didn't reach out to anybody. And every time I went to the doctors and then said, go on your meds, you need to go on your meds. It was just a constant reminder, oh yeah, I have HIV. And then, personal losses too, the stigma. I mean, stigma being an Indigenous woman also, being a single mom. And along with the HIV, discrimination with my family, lost a lot of friends too due to my HIV. And there's homelessness, job loss, PTSD, depression when I was incarcerated. I was outed right by the prison system too, in there with my medications in front of other inmates. Physical violence in my life. When my partner found out I was HIV positive, the relationship went to more violence. And sexual violence and child apprehension and emotional and verbal abuse. So I was around 2011, 2012 is when I started going out and seeking out counseling and support for these traumas. And so I started finding supportive housing. I was homeless for quite a few years, and I finally got into a shelter and then moved into second stage housing and then into a recovery house for about 6 months. I started getting addiction support with counselors and also getting involved with the HIV community was probably the biggest step for me. For living with it in a secret from 2000 to about 2012 when I actually went to AIDS Vancouver, and I went in there and asked to volunteer in their grocery program. And then I was like, wow, I saw all my peers coming all of a sudden. I said, I'm not alone here, and made so many good friendships, lots of laughter. It was a huge break in the stigma that I was internalizing myself. Also the helping others and my regular physician, seeing her every 3 months was a huge step. And she got to know me too, like we built more of a personal relationship. I first saw Julio for about 7 years, and then he basically had to give me a kick in the butt and give me a female doctor. And when I saw her, she actually says, well, I just want you to try your ARVs just for 6 months. I said, 6 months, okay, I can do that. And I did it for 6 months, and of course I became, my CD4 went up, viral load was undetectable, and I'm like, hey, I'm done now, right? She goes, no, you gotta do it for the rest of your life. I was kind of, but you know, those little steps and stuff, and getting the supports I needed, even from AIDS service organizations, and being at the grocery, I got to see job postings. My first one was for the Dr. Center, where that was my first job as a peer researcher, and it was awesome, and I got to know a new community there too, and which helped me get into HIV specific housing too. So from that point on, you know, I learned to basically try and be friends with my medications after dealing with so many of these things. And some of these traumas still come up. There's triggers, don't get me wrong and stuff. But today I can actually recognize them and see them. And I do know where to get the support that I need to, right? In order to stay healthy. So obviously trauma negatively affects the person's mental, physical, social, emotional, spiritual health. So trauma-informed care is so needed to support adherence to our ARVs and responses to structural vulnerabilities that expose women to traumas such as incarceration, unstable housing, like you were saying from my slide before that, in regards to my not adhering to it due to a lot of these traumas. This needs to be with all HIV care providers or GPs and stuff for them to bring this trauma-informed care to all women living with HIV.
So thank you so much, Flo. Flo does just an amazing job there. It's actually so nice to hear her voice again. So the study just presented and the discussion around it really informed another study on trauma and violence-informed HIV care and practice that we conducted in line with Flo, the Peer Research Associate Team, and the SHAWNA Positive Women's Advisory Board. The study really ties together a lot of the themes that we presented on today, including related to HIV stigma, disclosure of HIV status without consent, and the need for confidentiality and supports to take HIV medication and engage in HIV treatment and care. The team went through an exercise to map over 60 characteristics of their main HIV providers into multiple categories that fit into an existing framework of trauma and violence-informed practice. We followed this up by statistical analysis of these groupings. And we then looked at the relationships between having more of these characteristics in one's main HIV provider and multiple outcomes that the group hypothesized to be positively impacted by this type of practice. The results from the study were presented at the HIV and Women Workshop in Seattle in 2018. So some of the groupings are shown here in this slide. PayWeb members found that HIV practice and care that incorporated women-specific or gender-specific principles like having women hours or spaces, being knowledgeable about issues related to them as trans participants, and being knowledgeable about broader issues that face them as women were critical. Some providers that interacted with participants and treated them with respect, while also maintaining a safe, confidential environment in which they were supported to share their health needs was important. HIV care that was low barrier and supported people to share their health needs was also very critical. Low barrier HIV care and practice that was accessible and located in places that were easy to get to were preferred. Overarchingly, it was felt that HIV practice should meet women where they were at within their lives, to be non-judgmental, non-discriminatory, and supportive in all aspects of their lives, not just with respect to HIV. So ultimately, we landed on these themes shown here, the 5 circles at the top. These are the 5 categories that were felt to represent trauma and violence-informed HIV practice for participants. When considered all together in the form of a scale, we found that when participants' main HIV care providers practiced in a way that included more of these characteristics, participants were more likely to report better self-rated health, better physical and emotional quality of life, reduced barriers to accessing contraceptives, optimal art adherence, reduced HIV stigma, and increased access to mental health services. But there are several areas that were identified as critical to incorporate into an understanding of trauma and violence-informed care, while also really being considered separately rather than components of this type of care. So basically that the trauma and violence-informed care framework couldn't exactly address. So these included, and I'll just kind of highlight these here in these circles above. This includes care that was culturally responsive or appropriate and culturally safe care for Indigenous, cis and trans women and two-spirit people living with HIV. And it's not to say that this practice described overall in the previous few slides and this one doesn't exist in Vancouver. So there are places that have historically provided some or all of this type of care. Oak Tree Clinic, which is a clinical collaborator of ours, provides women-centered trauma and violence-informed HIV practice to women living with HIV and their families in BC. Many individual providers at various community health clinics also practice in this way. Kilala Lelum is a new urban Indigenous health and healing cooperative in the last year that opened up and partners Indigenous elders with physicians and allied health professionals to provide physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual care to the community in Vancouver's downtown east side. So this is a really innovative approach that we know a lot of our participants have been very excited about. We know that not all participants in our study are accessing these kind of services, though, and that before COVID, even funding has been increasingly cut, with many HIV organizations being closed in Metro Vancouver. So to begin addressing the very important aspect of culturally safe care accessed by participants in the cohort, we developed some questions on access to culturally safe resources with the guidance of Dr. Brittany Bingham, the Sadishi Director of Indigenous Research, and Dr. Charlotte Loki, Professor in the School of Public Health and Social Policy at UVic, both who are co-investigators on SHAWNA. I worked with the SHAWNA peer research team in a series of meetings about 6 months ago, in which the team reviewed the questionnaire, defined the research questions, did the data requests, and viewed and interpreted the results in a very iterative fashion. So here you can see some preliminary descriptive results among Indigenous participants in SHAWNA that assess the prevalence of accessing Indigenous resources outside of and within Indigenous communities. So in the top half of the slide, you can see that less than half of participants had ever accessed any resources listed in Indigenous communities. And here, 1/3 have had this access in the last 6 months. The most common resources accessed were cultural ceremonies and traditions, elders, and this was then followed by traditional medicine. In the bottom half of this slide, you can see that less than half of Indigenous participants had ever accessed any resources within Indigenous communities and less than 1/3 in the last 6 months. So the most common resources accessed again were cultural ceremonies and traditions and elders, and then here followed by support from family. We do expect some of these results overall to increase with the new clinic I mentioned, and it will be possible to detect this using our longitudinal data, if that's of interest to Indigenous participants and collaborators. Looking at these results together in the last few slides, and this one, the overarching observations from the peer research team was what a gap, particularly with respect to accessing elders ever in the last 6 months. This analysis is very preliminary, and the next steps that we had discussed included identifying who is more or less likely to access these resources, and then how these resources can impact other measures of health and well-being and health access as well. So it's really critical to understand these results through an Indigenous-led process and using Indigenous methodologies. And so we will continue to follow up with this research in the future. So I just want to close here by thanking you all again for the opportunity to speak. And I will pass over to Andrea to continue this discussion on culturally safe care needs among SHAWNA participants in the qualitative analysis.
All right, thank you, Kathleen and Desire. Let me just see if I can share my screen. Fingers crossed. Can you see my screen? Yes? Okay, great. All right. Thank you so much, Kathleen and Desire, and also thank you so much to Carrie for organizing this amazing series of presentations and for inviting us to present our work at the Fireside Chat series as well. I'm now going to speak a bit more about the qualitative and arts-based work that I've been able to lead as part of SHAWNA. And I've been able to work with an amazing team of strong Indigenous women, as well as collaborators from various community organizations, including the Afro-Canadian Positive Network of BC and YouthGo HIV and Hep C Society as well. As Kathleen mentioned, this work has taken place over the past 5 years or so in the context of a CHR-CBR grant and support from the Vancouver Foundation as well. And that has recently come to an end. But before I start, I would also like to position myself in this work as a white settler and relatively recent Swiss immigrant to Canada. As Kathleen has said, I do think it's really important that we all work together with humility and collectively to address the structural racism and the ongoing effects of colonialism, alongside making every effort to uplift and make space for Indigenous methodologies and ways of knowing, and most importantly, let the community define what their needs are in terms of knowledge production and what should be done with the research and how it should be used. In addition to the quantitative work that Kathleen has just been telling you about, we also conducted a qualitative analysis on Indigenous women-centered care and Indigenous women's wish list for culturally safe care and support, together with Flo Ranville, who's been involved in all aspects of this research and has done most of those interviews. And we've also worked very closely with Sherry Pouyak from Cannes, as well as Charlotte Loppy. We were able to present this work, and here you see the poster that we presented at the 2016 AIDS conference on this work. So the data that we analyzed for this analysis was drawn from qualitative interviews that we conducted with 64 women living with HIV between 2015 and 2017. And this analysis here specifically focuses on the voices of the 30 participants who identified as Indigenous, so as First Nations, Inuit, or Métis, cis and trans women living with HIV, as well as Two-Spirit participants as well. So Indigenous women living with HIV participated in the development of the interview guide. Both Flo and Lulu conducted the majority of the interviews and participated in data analysis as well. We analyzed Indigenous women's narratives, drawing on decolonizing critical and feminist theories, and through participatory research with Indigenous women living with HIV. As Kathleen has already highlighted on the quantitative side, HIV care that is responsive to Indigenous women's resilience and complex realities was not easily available in the care landscape in Metro Vancouver at the time. We found that HIV services offered limited engagement with Indigenous epistemologies, spiritualities, and collective healing. Ultimately, participants wanted their HIV care delivered in culturally safe, holistic ways that honored their indigeneity. Our findings show that Indigenous women living with HIV were actively engaged with their care. Cultural revitalization and igniting creative potential through holistic, relational, and community-based wisdom sharing, spirituality, and the desire to gain or regain language were important personal practices. Not all, but most participants placed great significance on ceremony in their lives and wellness. Daily ceremony, such as smudging, was very common, so were occasional sweats. Many participants identified culture as part of treatment, but stated obstacle to cultural revitalization, including limited access to cis and trans women-specific circles and urban healing ceremonies, as well as economic barriers to visiting home communities. Participants wanted greater access to HIV services delivered by Indigenous peers, elders, and in groups. Participants also highlighted intense power dynamics that shaped their care encounters. Many Indigenous women shared stories of racism and paternalism from practitioners that interfered with the care that they requested and needed. For example, Nikki was suffering kidney failure, and Nikki is a pseudonym for our participants, which is not uncommon among people who are taking antiretroviral medication. When her symptoms were dismissed and mislabeled at an urban hospital in the emergency department. So Nikki said, I think as a Native woman, I am more pushy in that sense. I was always taught never to take no for an answer. I'm very persistent, especially when I know something is wrong with me. I've actually gotten escorted out of a local hospital emergency department because they thought I was on drugs. They literally had security guards. I was shaking. My skin was gray. I was sweating profusely, and they thought I was doped out. And here I had a kidney infection, and I almost died the day after they kicked me out. Nikki's narrative speaks to the severe barriers many Indigenous women face in accessing care. Thankfully, Nikki was able to access care at a different hospital and was eventually able to receive the care that she needed. Since this racist and discriminatory encounter, she's no longer accessing care at that hospital and has become a fierce activist for culturally safe care. Another significant focus. Oh, is it hard to hear? Do I have to speak up? Is it hard to hear? Okay, let me speak a bit louder then. I'm sorry. Another significant focus of the SHAWNA Project is the criminalization of HIV non-disclosure. In Canada, people living with HIV have to disclose their HIV status unless they use a condom and have a low viral load. The Global Commission on HIV and the Law, UNAIDS, and the World Health Organization. Sorry, can you see everything? I can't. Can you see my slide? Okay. Sorry, just some technical issues. I just don't, please speak up because I can't really see participants. So yes, I'm going to continue now. So the Global Commission on HIV and the Law, UNAIDS, and the World Health Organization, amongst other international organizations, have raised severe concerns around the harms in using an overly broad interpretation of the law to regulate HIV transmission on human rights and public health grounds. Despite well-established evidence pointing to the shortcomings of the criminal law in governing HIV transmission, over 72 countries globally criminalize HIV non-disclosure. But unfortunately, Canada stands out in its assertive and overly broad approach to criminalization of HIV non-disclosure. The criminalization of HIV non-disclosure is often positioned as a way of protecting women, yet very little empirical data documents the actual impacts of these laws and how they shape HIV care trajectories, sexual health, and social inequities among women living with HIV. To change this and to set a research and policy priorities to address the gendered impacts of the criminalization of HIV non-disclosure, in 2015, together with the HIV Legal Network, our team brought together, I might have jumped the slide. Here we go. Our team brought together academics, community organizations, including CAN and ACPNet, policymakers, lawyers, and clinicians to discuss the issue and to set priorities for research and for policy around the gendered impacts of HIV non-disclosure. Flo Ranwell and I co-chaired this event that really helped lay the groundwork for our subsequent research on the gendered effects of HIV criminalization. And here are some pictures from the event, and you can see Sherry Pouillac presenting here on the AHA Center and the work that she does there. So based on the priorities that we set at the Research Roundtable, we conducted a qualitative study that highlighted that the criminalization of HIV non-disclosure renders women living with HIV who are already, as you've seen in the findings that Kathleen has presented, disproportionately affected by gender-based violence at additional risk of violence from intimate partners. HIV disclosure can shift relationship power dynamics by aggregating partner abuse and manipulation. Likewise, women who experience rape or sexual assault may not report to police for fear of non-disclosure charges. I'm just going to read a couple of quotes from participants that were published in this paper. So this one woman said, "You can't get into a relationship without fear of going to jail. You stay in that relationship because you are afraid that the person will report you." Another participant, another transgender participant living with HIV said, "I've been raped recently. I didn't report it. I couldn't. Halfway through, he just asked, 'Are you positive?' How do I answer that?" In recent positive developments, based on the federal justice, based on calls by the Federal Justice Department, BC and Ontario have issued prosecutorial guidelines that state that people with a low viral load for at least 6 months should be exempt from the prosecution of HIV non-disclosure. While this is a step in the right direction in limiting the reach of the law, a quantitative SHAWNA analysis that I was able to present at the 2018 AIDS conference indicated that despite this reduction of the reach of the law, 48% of participants in the SHAWNA cohort would continue to be at risk of prosecution over a 7-year study follow-up period. Those at highest risk of prosecution are the most marginalized women living with HIV, including women who are unstably housed, sex workers, and women who've been recently incarcerated. This highlights the urgent need for further law reform, as the most marginalized women living with HIV continue to be at risk of prosecution. One clear call that also came from the roundtable event that I was just telling you about was that the community asked for the use of arts-based participatory methods to further explore how stigma and criminalization shapes the lives of cis and trans women living with HIV. I'm now going to play you a short recording of Flo, again from the CGC speaker series at St. Paul's Hospital in April 2019, where she explains the methods of the Photo Voice project way better than I ever could, because she actually co-facilitated most of those groups. So let me just pull this up.
Did 5 groups of Photo Voice, and why we chose to do arts-based Photo Voice is because a lot of the talking about HIV and stigma, talking about criminalization of HIV non-disclosure is such a sensitive topic even for myself to talk about. So when we actually got our groups together, it helps people, anything actually visual or arts-based and stuff just helps you to kind of, I guess, bring out those traumas actually from dealing with all of that. And with these groups that we got to, they got to narrate their own work and how they're feeling around stigma and criminalization of HIV. We can also, from me being a co-facilitator, I got trained in the first pilot project, and then I got to do 3 other projects to help co-facilitate, as well as Lulu. We, I guess I'm really close, a little biased to the Indigenous group we did. When we had 8 women from that group, and we had to actually go and recruit women from existing support groups. So it had to be a group that was already comfortable being together. And another group that we did was Thanks to Patience Magugula and the Afro-Canadian and Black Net, where she helped recruit a group of women for that group itself too. Also, Sarah Chone helped us recruit for the Youth Co. So we had a group on youth. And our Positive Women's Advisory Board was the first pilot project, because that group had already been existing as we met quarterly for a couple of years. And Lulu's going to talk a little bit more in regards to the trans group. So basically, we did 5 to 6 sessions. So basically in the first session, we would do a PowerPoint project, letting the women know what the law is today around HIV disclosure and non-disclosure. And surprising enough, in these groups, there was a lot of women, like, it brought up so much fear because they didn't even know, right? And I could read that. And these women coming together in the first group, whether, like, I'll speak to, like, the Indigenous group, where a lot of them didn't know each other because they were from 2 different groups. And on our first group, we would do the PowerPoint. And the Indigenous group, we were really fortunate to have it opened by Elder Roberta Price. So she was actually present out of 4 out of the 6 for the Indigenous, which made the women feel a lot better too. And we also had a smudge in the beginning, a smudge at the end, and any kind of one-on-one support that the women needed. And on that first day, we would finish off, we had pre-cut images that were specific to each group, whether it was Indigenous or ACP Net, or whether it was for youth and stuff. And so they would make a collage on a poster board in regards to stigma and criminalization of HIV. There's lots of, like, bars and stuff. We're going to show you, like, this is actually the collages that we put together from some of the women where they did. So this kind of got the juices flowing for them in regards to, because the next part was the Photo Voice. So after they did their collages and then they did the narrations, the next group that came, we would give them a camera and give them kind of instructions how to do digital camera using that, how they couldn't actually ethically they couldn't take any faces or anybody that could be recognizable. And the women got the cameras for about a week, sometimes 2 weeks, and then they brought them back, and we'd get the images done. And then we met again, and the women would actually pick their top 3 or 4 photos that they wanted, and then they would narrate towards those photos. And part of the narrations, you know, we got to get them transcribed, bring them back to the women from what they can see, what they actually were saying on the audio recorder, and they got to actually edit that too. Oh no, I don't want that in there. I'd like this in there. So it was truly just, they were in charge of the whole project themselves and what we actually brought out to the photo voice. And then in closing and stuff, they got to keep the digital camera, obviously, and they were also honored with an honorarium for each group. Nice hot meal, and everything was just appropriate to which group was going on. And so we have 27 photos, right? Yeah, 27 photos out of the 5 groups.
All right, well, thank you, Flo, for speaking about the process for the photo voice and how we really tried to make, for each of the groups, to make the group feel safe by really working together with the women in the groups to kind of find ways of getting together that supported them in talking about topics that were really quite hard to talk about. And yes, and that looked different for the youth group. It looked different for the group with the Afro-Canadian Positive Network of BC, where participants really wanted to use prayer at the beginning and at the end of each group. And then for the Indigenous group, like Flo said, we were really lucky to have Elder Roberta Price join most of the groups. We started with this much at the beginning and at the end as well. So yeah, I think that made a really big difference in terms of just trying to create the safest possible environment for participants. So I'm now going to present some of the pictures from the various photo voice groups. These pictures and narrative presented on this slide are from Gracie, which is also a pseudonym, and are presented in an analysis led by Amy Maudsley, who I think many of you know, and Flo Ranville, that is currently under review at the International Journal of Indigenous Health. In this paper, we focused on the pictures and narratives of Indigenous participants and the intersections between colonialism and criminalization and surveillance. In giving voice to these images, depicting experiences of HIV-related stigma and criminalization, many of the participants described interlocking traumas rooted in Canada's colonial past and present. These included dislocation from territory and home communities, experiences of physical, emotional, and sexual violence, HIV disclosure without consent, social isolation because or related to HIV stigma, illicit substance use, and criminal justice involvement. Gracie's quote ties together her experience with the criminalization of HIV non-disclosure and speaks to the layers of discrimination she faces as an Indigenous woman and as someone living with HIV. So Gracie narrated her 2 photographs as follows. The bars represent jail, and on the other side, there's a big tree. That's me. But half of me is still here. So for me, that would be discrimination. I'm a First Nations woman, and I stand up for myself because we get discriminated against a lot as First Nations people and as people living with HIV. Once we're free and standing up for women like it should be, we turn into butterflies. They represent freedom and beauty. To me, these pictures are about my culture. When I look at my pictures, I think about the prairies and about, powwows and fancy dancing. Gracie explains the metaphors the metaphors, sorry, in her images, which relate to the themes of colonization and discrimination, and also resilience and liberation from colonial violence and governance. Responsibility formed another prominent theme in this analysis. Several participants photographed condoms and pills and described the weight of the responsibilities that come with living with HIV, including daily medications, an imperative to maintain a low viral load, regular medical checkups, and condom use. Many participants had complex relationships with HIV treatment due to traumatic experiences with Western medicine and the dismissal of traditional approaches to healing. Cici and Jay speak to this. This is a picture of me holding my pills. They're little, but they have such a big control over my life. And Cici said, I wish I had more time to learn the teachings, the proper teachings. That's the thing I miss the most, is losing my culture. And then having this HIV, you have to learn the right ways and do all the things they ask you to do. This is a collage from Titi, who was part of the Afro-Caribbean and Black Women's Group. This analysis was published in Medicine, Anthropology, and Theory. Social isolation and loneliness were prominent themes in all participants' photographs and discussions. In narrating her collage, Titi describes an explicit link between social isolation and the vulnerabilities of women living with HIV to violence and blackmail and intimate partner violence. In a context where HIV is criminalized, the threat of charges looms large. Even when a woman has disclosed her HIV status to her partner, the criminalization of HIV non-disclosure can be a powerful force in keeping women in abusive relationships. Speaking on the experiences of African immigrant women living with HIV, Titi's narrative of her collage started by asking the group, what is behind HIV that we cannot talk about? So then Titi went on to talk about her collage. Knowing my status completely changed my relationships. I feel like I don't belong, and that is stigma. The hand out straight means I just want to be alone. And say you decide to be in a relationship. Once your partner finds out you are HIV positive, they bully you and physically abuse you. For us African immigrant and refugee women, we're not so sure of what our rights are. We don't report abuse, most times because we're scared. What if we are arrested? Say we have kids, how are they going to survive? So you keep that to yourself. The hands with the blood represent that you are beaten and bullied. You keep staying in that relationship because you're afraid that the person will report you. So women live in fear. A notable detail in Titi's collage is the fact that the picture of the medication, of the HIV medications, is placed on the bad side. Her decision to place the medications there seems to echo academic debates regarding the false promise of ending HIV-related stigma with treatment alone. Kaya, a non-binary participant, took a picture of those shoes in front of the courthouse in the downtown east side of Vancouver. She said, spelling out the word HIV with shoes, that in itself is a huge message, because the way I look at it, doesn't matter who we are or what we are, we all walk the same little path. As a non-binary person, I didn't know how else to capture a non-binary individual. The only way I could do it was by shoes. It's a 12-year journey of having to live with a virus that I so much wish I could just get rid of. Becoming HIV positive has been one of those things I regret. Saying that, I wouldn't be here where I am today if it wasn't because of being positive. This, for Kaya, using various types of shoes to spell out HIV helped depict her experience of HIV criminalization as a non-binary person. And in describing her complicated relationship with her diagnosis, also speaks to her resilience and her strength. At the end of the project, we asked all participants about their experience participating in the Photo Voice project and what they would like to leave behind and to take with them. Overwhelmingly, even though discussing stigma and criminalization was very difficult, participants really spoke about also the community they found in these groups. So I'm just going to read one in the interest of time, so we have enough time to also for questions. So one participant said, "What I want to leave here is my shame and my guilt. What I want to take away is all the love, caring, and support I get from the ladies." And I just want to add here, like, again, how important it was to do this work very community-based and very participatory, so that the groups were culturally appropriate for each of the subgroups of cis and trans women that we wanted to talk about, and to just also really have this work be very peer-based as well. I think that really did help talk about some really complicated issues, but in a way that participants felt safe sharing their experiences as well. This project culminated in a week-long photo voice exhibit at the gallery in East Vancouver. The opening event of the exhibition included a panel of experts, including Flo and Lulu, HIV physicians and legal experts, who each spoke to the profound impact that stigma and criminalization has on the lives of women living with HIV. We also held a private opening event for all participants, and were able to share food and celebrate the contributions of everybody to this project. Along with the exhibition, we also put together a booklet of all photographs that were featured in the exhibition. You can find the booklet online at the above link, and also on our website. All of this work fed into separate policy briefs to the federal and provincial attorneys general, and to a submission to the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. And in June 2018, Desire and Flo were able to personally present the findings of our work to the Justice Minister, David Lametti, at the Symposium on HIV Law and Human Rights, organized by the Canadian HIV AIDS Legal Network. And just as a funny anecdote, Flo had passed on the Photo Voice booklet to the Justice Minister, and he then went up to speak to the crowd. And when he came back, I think an aide had forgotten to take the booklet and brought it to his new seating area or whatever. So Flo made sure that the Justice Minister had the booklet and that it didn't get left behind. And she suggested to the Justice Minister that he keep it in a place that he can see the booklet often. So she said he should put it in his washroom and consult the booklet frequently, so that he can really learn about all the experiences and of stigma and criminalization that the women shared in our project. So yeah, and so with that, I just want to finish here by thanking all the participants of the SHAWNA Court and the qualitative side and arts-based side of things for sharing their experiences so generously with us. Without that, we couldn't do this work. I want to thank the PayWeb and the CAB for all their contributions in guiding this research and setting the priorities for analysis. And I want to also thank all the community partners who help support our work as well. So with that, I would like to, would love some questions, would love to discuss collaborations with everybody. And yes, thank you so much for sitting through an hour and a half of a presentation as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrea.
I was wondering if maybe you can, if maybe I can share the slides that you sent, because I know there were a lot of people who had registered through CAN and they had to go to other sessions that unfortunately got scheduled at the same time as this fireside chat. I was just wondering if it would be okay to share slides.
Yeah, we can compile these into one set of slides to make it easier and then send that to you to distribute to anyone who's interested, for sure.
Okay, because we had a list, a longer list of people who had intended to attend, so I'd just like to share that info with them.
Absolutely. We'll make it so right now, the slides, I don't know, they have a horrendously big size in terms of, because we have so many pictures. So Kathleen and I will combine and turn it into a PDF so you can actually send it, because we couldn't even send the whole thing.
Okay.
And it took like so long, my internet's so bad. So yes, absolutely, we're really happy for you to share it. And we really like, one of the things, you know, being on the West Coast, it's been so cool as part of these fireside chats to really, and I know that's the intention, and thank you, Carrie, for bringing us together in this way. Like, it's been really cool to see what's happening in different parts of the country, and I know both Kathleen and I would really love to continue to collaborate and build upon each other's work and support each other in that way. So yes, please share. Is there any questions, any comments? I know, Peter, you were saying you wanted some time also to discuss some issues. So yeah, we're open to anything.
And please get in touch with us after if you have a question that you want to discuss by email or anything like that too, and we're happy to talk by that route.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Background, I'm in the middle of an Ontario human rights complaint against a music festival that halfway through its 2-week period told me to remove my rainbow sticker from my volunteer ID badge. And in essence, I shouldn't be in a closet when serving an organization. And the larger picture is HIV stigmatism in the workplace and the volunteer space as well. And I'm wondering if there's any work towards setting a standard of some sort to declare this organization or that workspace or volunteer space as HIV safe, whereby people at some time in the journey can come out to them or may not, but feel comfortable in working without any, pressure of being forced out, etc. Because many people still volunteer pre and post HIV, work pre and post HIV where possible, and so that barrier is still out there. And I would also add to other health status and other intersectional issues as well. So that's kind of and it's a large one, but this will require partnering with other organizations, etc., to make a safe and inclusive space for all. Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, Peter, I'm so sorry to hear that. I mean, obviously, I have to say I'm not a legal expert in any way, shape, or form, or a lawyer. But to me, that seems absolutely discriminatory to ask someone to remove the rainbow sticker from a badge, to be honest. And that actually does seem like an infraction of human rights, in my non-expert opinion. And I think, absolutely, I think it's really important to bring these issues to the forefront. And to your second point, and I'm sure like places like the HIV Legal Network and HALCO as well, that have like actual staff lawyers on staff will be really important places. And I know that they would definitely be amazing resources to help like put this forward. And I think with issues around disclosure at the workplace and providing a safe workspace for people living with HIV, I think that's a really, really important issue, and something that I actually feel that hasn't been talked about enough. I think Kathleen has presented on some of the analysis around disclosure without consent. And I think that also really plays into this, like so many people living with HIV have their status disclosed against their consent. And that can have some really serious implications in terms of their housing situation or employment and other issues. Meanwhile, there is absolutely no requirement to disclose the status to an employer. But at the same time, like you say, still important if someone chooses to do so, that there is a safe space to do that. And I think in the context of COVID as well, I think this issue has come up again and again, right? Like, what kind of information are we required to disclose to an employer, and how's that information going to be used? And especially with intersecting marginalization, intersecting stigmas, that can look really differently for depending on where people stand. In terms of racialization, in terms of economic privilege, and gender as well, sexual orientation, as we, as the incident you just talked about. So I think those are really, really important issues, and I definitely think that that's something that we come up in our context, in the context of housing, but I think it's a really important piece also to discuss in terms of employment. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter, for bringing that up, and thanks, Andrea. Just to echo everything that Andrea said, just briefly too, I know that's exactly a really important concern that is brought up by participants in the cohort, and something that we have aimed to address, looking at disclosure without consent. We do look at, by whom this disclosure happens, so health professionals, co-workers, but I'm realizing that there may be a gap in terms of environments, and whether or not, fear of having HIV status disclosed can prevent people from engaging in workplaces as well, and which type of workplace. So I'm actually going to bring this back to the team and discuss it a bit more and see if we can incorporate something like that on the questionnaire, because that's an incredibly important point, especially right now. So thank you.
I don't want it to overtake. Yeah, where I'm coming from is diversity is not always visible, and that and there's wonderful ways to express that. This is where I'm coming from. Nobody should be in any closet, whether it's HIV, etc., religion, etc., etc., etc. Very important. So this is where I'm coming in the larger sense of this thing, right? And it's, but also I'm going to flip the coin to an organization and saying it's incumbent that they have something on their website to saying we're safe and inclusive. Their anti-harassment policies are based on the inhuman grounds of the Human Rights Act that speak to somebody who may be in a closet on one of these enumerated grounds that means something to them, but if they're afraid to come out to their parents or other people, they can say, oh, that's just legal stuff, don't worry. And I'm speaking in terms of many people who are immigrants coming to this country and fear, who have difficulties with families, etc., or youth who are afraid to come out to their parents or other people. So I'm sort of a standard or something to advocate to have your anti-harassment policies on the website of any organization, because that's how you operate. That's the guiding points of how you run things. They won't solve anything, but at least they're up there, and they will signal some degree of inclusiveness and safety. It won't be perfect. It's not a solution, but it's something. And transparency is so important, because when you're working or volunteering, you sign off on a non-disclosure agreement most times, or as an employer. So it's really hard to talk about that outside the realm of where you're working or volunteering without getting into legal trouble. So having it on websites is a starting point anyway. And that's a degree of safety. So I can look at it, because I will not have the benefit of meeting you, and you, and in that, if I'm going to apply to a website, I will go, I would look at the website, right? That's probably where people go to look for things to volunteer and work. And so there's work to be done. I'll hold off on that. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I fully agree. And I think, like Kathleen was talking about the research space for us, and I think that's the similar thing, to just have those markers there so people feel recognized, and I think that's a really important piece. And with COVID, like all the online spaces as well, right? So yes, websites need to be very clear on that, so that they signal safety and they signal that people can choose to disclose or not, but that they feel safe. So I fully agree. Yeah. So anything else? Any other questions, comments? I mean, we would love it, but please also feel free to reach out to any of us. If anything comes up, and we're super happy, yes, we'll work on reducing the file size and send it back to you, Karen.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you.
Well, I mean, it's you guys' call to make, but I know 2 hours of virtual meetings are relatively long, so we're also happy to wrap it up here, and happy to answer any other things that might come up over email, or we're always happy to set up a meeting as well.
Did anyone else have any questions? No. Okay. Well, thank you all for doing that presentation. It was great. I know on my end I had a little bit of difficulty hearing Kathleen, but we'll see what the filmmaker says, because it might have just been my connection.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having us, Carrie, and thanks everyone for attending. It was so wonderful to have this chance.
There was a comment from Monique. It just says, thank you for your wisdom and sharing your work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Monique. Thanks for coming, and yeah, and spending this hour with us.
Thank you, guys. I hope you were able to listen to me, to understand what I was saying.
Thank you.
And thanks for reminding me of my privilege. Yay.
You're welcome.
Bye.
And thanks, Carrie.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye, guys.